Hello guys, Charles here and welcome back to my channel. Today we'll be discussing how to use the 20th century permutation techniques popularised by 12-tone composers such as Schoenberg, Copland and Stravinsky, and how to use them to develop cohesion and fluency throughout your soloing. The main takeaway I hope you'll get from today's lesson is that to create an interesting and engaging solo is less about your technical abilities on your instrument and more to do with your compositional and creative skills. I hope that after watching this video, you'll take the material which a composition gives you and you'll strive to explore it further, developing it into something new, challenging, and something personal, something that sounds like you. So Jerry Bergonzi is widely regarded as one of the great masters of motivic development. He's written over a dozen books on the subject, including a thesaurus of melodic cells. ChadLB is another great player who endorses the use of melodic cells in soloing, and he'll often combine melodic cells together to create longer fluid lines. And although you certainly should go and purchase those guys' products because they're absolutely fantastic, you should also be striving to construct your own thesaurus of melodic cells by extracting melodic material from the tunes you are learning. And that's what we're going to be looking at today. So the tradition of jazz gives us a really good example of why melodic development is important on a really fundamental level. A contrafact is a song which shares the same or a very similar chord progression to an original tune. Players would often create a contrafact to avoid having to pay copyright royalties. You cannot copyright a chord progression, but you can copyright a tune. So the great players would take the harmonic progression from a well-known song and create their own melody over the top of it. A great example of this would be I Got Rhythm. We have Oleo and Anthropology and probably tens, if not hundreds of other tunes. It's probably one of the most contrafacted songs, I Got Rhythm, and they all share the same chord progression. Now the issue is that as a soloist, what we often do is we play the tune to the head, let's say I Got Rhythm, then we completely randomly solo, just trying to almost fit the right notes and interesting concepts over the chord progression, and then at the end of the tune we come back to the head. If you entered the jazz club during the solos, it would be very difficult to tell which song was being played. You'd think, well, is this I Got Rhythm, or is it Oleo, or is it Anthropology, or many of the other contrafacts? Your solo should reference the original melodic material. Someone should be able to walk into the bar, hear you soloing and think, oh yeah, this is I Got Rhythm, because they recognise melodic cells that you as a player extracted and are referencing from the tune. That's how we can tell, even though the chord progression is the same, which tune we are soloing over. Now there's three simple ways of doing this which spring to mind, which would be very feasible when you're improvising. The techniques we're going to look at in a moment are really practice room exercises. They're probably a bit too taxing on the brain to be thinking about while you're playing live. But three simple approaches. One would be to simply play the melody or play extracts from the melody during your solo. People would be able to cotton onto that and think, oh yes, we're playing I Got Rhythm instead of Oleo. A second simple approach would be to take a chunk out of the melody and repeat it. This is very much the way that traditional blues tunes worked. You'd have a very simple, short melodic phrase, I woke up this morning and kicked my dog, and then you'd wake up again and kick your dog, and then you'd wake up again and kick your dog. And we have the same melody over and over again, probably 3 times, and then the 4th time, whatever the final phrase is, I don't know, I went to bed and I'll kick my dog again tomorrow, or something like that, something nice about kicking your dog. And a third simple approach would be to extract rhythmic information, probably whichever rhythm you think is the most punchy from the original tune, and construct your original melodies, but force that rhythm onto them. And it's going to have some sort of shared DNA with the original tune. Now the purpose of this video is to show you how you can take the compositional techniques of the 20th century masters and apply them to simple jazz fragments. So let's get straight into that now. So I'm going to use the first couple of bars of Autumn Leaves as my example for the rest of this video. So the starting melody to Autumn Leaves goes something like this. 1, 2, 3, 4. So really simple little melody there. What we're going to do is just take that cell and create an entire solo over the first 8 bars using that cell alone, applying these techniques. So the first thing I'm going to do is use a technique called rhythmic diminution. So instead of playing that with the syncopated rhythm it comes with, for the sake of today's video, we're interested in melodic development. So I'm going to simply make it a string of eighth notes, which is stylistically obviously the way we often play in bebop and swing genres. So that would become something like this. A 1, 2, 3, 4. So I've made all the rhythms smaller and compacted them into eighth notes. Now straight away we have two simple approaches we can take with that cell alone. That's going to be our main melodic cell we're going to be developing, and we can transpose it and sequence it. So transposing it would be just randomly moving it somewhere else on the instrument. So we could play. So I'm transposing it onto different notes. Now a sequence is when we move up or down diatonically through a scale. Now it could be the chromatic scale, we can move up in semitones, or it could be diatonic to the tune. So in this instance, we're in the key of G major, so I'm going to move that cell staying diatonic. This is called sequencing. So I can play any of those cells anywhere on the neck there, and it's going to sound like it comes from the same DNA as my original cell. It sounds like autumn leaves. Now the next technique is something called retrograde, and retrograde, having that retro in there, means backwards. So instead of playing it forwards, we're going to play it backwards. And as always, we could sequence that retrograde. So already we've got two melodic fragments from that original melody alone. We've got forwards, got backwards, and we've got anywhere else on the neck once we've sequenced it about. The next technique's called inversion. So an inversion is when we take the intervallic structure of the melodic cell, and instead of going up or down, we do the opposite. So this particular melodic cell goes up a tone, up a semitone, up a perfect fourth. So we're going to go down a tone, down a semitone, and down a perfect fourth. Now the problem with that, if we stay on that same starting note of E, is we've got a C sharp in there. This is supposed to be an A minor 7 chord, so we're going to have to move this around so that that same intervallic structure fits diatonically. Well, that works if we go starting on D. So that's a transposed inversion. So we've got 3 cells now. All come from the original source material. Now we can combine all these techniques together. So here's an example of inversion retrograde. So we're taking that inverted intervallic structure and playing that backwards. So the inverted structure was this. So we can play that backwards. So we've got all these cells now. One last technique I want to show you before I give you a silly example of all this combined together is something we discussed in 3 times your chords video, which you can see up here, which was this concept of octave displacement. So we can apply octave displacement to any of the previous techniques. Here's what octave displacement would look like on the original cell. So here's our original cell. And here's displacing every other note by an octave. So I've composed a short solo over the first 8 bars of Autumn Leaves here. This is an over-the-top example. Of course, these are ideas you want to throw into your solo. Constructing an entire solo from them is going to sound a bit over the top, but let's hear how that sounds. Now Now, although that example's quite over the top, if you are a GCSE or A-level composition student or music student, if you wrote a composition like that and you could justify why you'd chosen all those notes, you would get brilliant marks. You'd be right at the A and A-star level, because composition at that level is not actually about writing something that sounds very good. It's about justifying your decisions, just like an artist might throw paint on a canvas, like we can all do, but it's their justification of why that is art that is where they get their marks. So when you're practicing soloing over a specific jazz standard, you should be focusing on extracting these melodic cells from that standard, not just trying to create anything over the changes, trying to fit the right notes to the right chords. That's kind of a good place to start, but you want to, as soon as possible, move into developing specific melodic cells taken from the source material. In doing this, you can create a solo that is melodically cohesive, stylistically appropriate, but also there's plenty of opportunity for injecting your own style and personality into your soloing still. When top flight players do this really well, there's this sense of like lineage and history that lends itself to the solo, and it creates this incredible sense of shape and direction to the soloing. Now, this is never truly mastered. The great players in interviews are always talking about how they're still working on these sort of things, but it's something you should be striving to improve at every time you pick your instrument up. Now, as I mentioned before, this is not something you would be thinking about live. It's far too much to be thinking about developing melodic cells, but you work on this in the practice room when you are rehearsing Autumn Leaves. You work on developing vocabulary, and the hope is that some of that vocabulary organically comes out in your playing when you are soloing live. So a simple approach to work on this in the practice room would be take the first most obvious melodic cell from the tune. So I chose the very first phrase from Autumn Leaves, for example. Sit there and write out some motivic developments of this, just like I've done in today's video, but also spend time just improvising with that. Try and move that melodic cell around the neck. This will take you, weeks and months, not minutes and days. So spend time really developing that melodic cell and get as much value from it as you possibly can. Next, find the second most prominent melodic cell, whatever you think that is, and repeat the process. Once you feel you're confident with two melodic cells, you can try and blend those two melodic cells together into longer cells, which is what ChadLB recommends. And of course, you keep adding cells and continuing this process, and you create this vocabulary over this tune that's really, really accurate and connected to the tune, and it's not just you fitting correct notes over chords. So focus first on developing those smaller cells and gradually build them up, and your capacity for developing longer phrases and eventually full solos will improve. At the same time, your technique and vocabulary will be improving tenfold, and you're getting this sort of universal benefit for you as a player working on your musicality, affects all facets of your playing. So from now on, for every new standard that you tackle, try and create your own list of melodic cells. And you can, maybe create a dozen for each, and you want to start building your own thesaurus, just like Jerry Bergonzi did, of melodic cells. Keep track of your favorites, and those favorite cells are going to become your sound. And you can take the cells from Autumn Leaves and try them over Stella, and vice versa. And you're building this own vocabulary that's unique to you, but is intrinsically connected to the heritage of our art that we love so much. So thank you for joining me today, guys. I hope that having watched this video, you'll feel inspired to extract some melodic motifs and have a little dabble with the concepts we've discussed in this video. If nothing else, at least try and reference the melody little and often throughout your solos, rather than just creating 100% of your own material when you solo. Leave a comment down below to let me know your own tips for developing a cohesive sound in your soloing, and let me know any other topics you'd like me to cover in future on this channel. Please do give this video a like, subscribe, ding that notification bell, and do share with any of your friends who are completely incapable of playing a captivating guitar solo. And as always, I hope you're all doing very well, getting plenty of practice in, and I very much look forward to seeing you in the next one. Cheers.
Roll up, let me embed a story you'll never forget. Drip, drip, but drowning in debt now. You can't buy your way out, and I heard you find it difficult to cope well. Here by this bottle full of hope.